okay? I'm aware that sometimes my microphone can be a bit quiet, so good. Okay, yep. And yeah, in Crazer, there's about 7 staff who all work on questions around climate and sustainability, and we've also got a cohort around 5 PhD students all working on this theme as well. So there's quite a sort of fairly vibrant community of us working on these issues in Crazer here. So
great, thank you. So yeah, so we've got a kind of quite, I feel a bit, I maybe need some yeah, we've got quite a fixed format, and I think I've kind of sent the questions to you prior to these sections, but I think also to kind of take advantage of the fact that you can be here live, just to maybe have a bit of a Q&A afterwards, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely, yeah, great.
Brilliant. So the first question is, what are you working on in relation to climate change right now?
Great. Yeah, so I was reflecting on this. It's quite an exciting time, really, to be working on climate change related to the to be somebody who's been doing it for a while, because suddenly things are exploding and there's just things happening everywhere. So that's kind of great for somebody who wants to do this kind of work. It's also sort of terrifying because you look at the scale of the task ahead of us. So I found myself getting involved probably in too many things. My own kind of inability to say no to things often as well, but it's been great the last couple of years, the way things have really taken off. So I do research, fairly applied research that's around ensuring that we can inform policy and practice through what I do. And most of what I've been doing, particularly recently, has been about thinking what the future zero carbon economy might look like. So especially in places like South Yorkshire, where we're still dealing with the economic legacy and social legacy of deindustrialisation of the 1970s and 80s. We're still dealing with the impacts of that. So that the key term for me then is just transition. No doubt you've talked about this term already, but the idea of getting to zero carbon in a way that is fair, it's inclusive, and it creates benefits for people in places that most need those benefits. So things like, what are the jobs and skills needed to achieve zero carbon transitions? How can we support organisations of different kinds, so businesses, social enterprises, public sector organisations? How can we support them to decarbonise? What different ways of organising and owning our city's infrastructure might we need to achieve our goals? And how can we help develop policy to effectively achieve those goals? So that's kind of an overview of the kinds of things I look at, and then to give some specific examples of projects I'm working on, because we're thinking about Sheffield a bit in some of the questions that you've asked. So working with the organisation that used to be called Sheffield City Region is now called South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. So the organisation that kind of sits across South Yorkshire to support economic development and planning and transport stuff. I've been working with them to understand, if we're investing in low carbon energy transition, what might that mean in terms of the kinds of supply chains for energy technologies? So who will build the heat pumps we need for our homes, for example? Where will that happen? But importantly, what are the jobs and skills required in order to do that? And how might other people's jobs and skills might need to change in order to meet some of those challenges? I've also been working with Sheffield City Region to understand what we mean by that term, just transition. And I've been speaking to lots of people at a sort of high level decision-making level to understand what they know about and think about just transition. That's been really interesting to speak to those people who aren't experts in the field. They're kind of generalists as politicians or leaders in some sort of way, to try to get to think about how they think about some of these challenges. It's been really interesting. I've also been doing some work about the hydrogen economy, and the idea of the hydrogen economy is really exploded in recent years. That's probably a poor choice of words there, but it's really kind of taken off, and there's been a huge amount of interest in it as a kind of technological fix really for some of the challenges that we have. And so I've been looking at how that's playing out in different regions, in particularly in the Humber near to us, and where there's a whole range of things happening around how they might use hydrogen to decarbonise industry, as well as maybe to replace gas heating in homes. And alongside that, I've been doing some work with people, some of the organisations in the Humber, to understand some of the societal barriers or potential around deploying these sorts of technologies. So what do the public think, what do citizens think about hydrogen as a technology? What are some of the, maybe the downsides of hydrogen in terms of it being quite a top-down technology to implement? It kind of gets produced somewhere and pumped into your home or whatever, a bit like what we have with gas, whereas other technologies maybe allow us to take a bit more control over our, for example, how we heat our homes and what have you. A couple of other projects around understanding how older industrial places are trying to change their economies towards the low carbon economies, and how that impacts on places in different sorts of ways. So for one project I'm doing with the Regional Studies Association, I'm looking at how different towns around Europe have been affected, and I'm looking at a place in Asturias in northern Spain, for example, that's recently its final coal mine has just closed, and what that means for that place. I'm looking at a place in Germany where in the early 2010s they had a big boom in solar PV, solar panel manufacturing, and it was a huge thing, and then suddenly all the manufacturing pretty much left and went to China or closed down because of competition from China. So just looking at not just the positive side of what move to a low carbon economy might mean, but also some of the downsides. And then again, coming back to Sheffield, very recently, just about to start a project funded by a Swedish research council, looking at steel industrialization and the impacts of that on communities, and doing a bit of a historical case study of Sheffield, which is going to be really interesting, as well as places in Sweden. So that's a flavour of the kinds of research project. It is all kind of research project, the stuff that I'm involved in. But I do think it's really important through all that we're engaging with policy and practice. And another thing I've been doing is working with in the university, working with its, or as part of the climate action group that's been set up in the university, trying to work with our colleagues in different parts of the university to join up how we as a university reach zero carbon goals, and also how we can support organisations across South Yorkshire. So I hope that gives a bit of a flavour and wasn't too listy, but I hope that gives you a sense.
Thanks, Will. And yeah, maybe to kind of give us a bit more of a flavour of the kind of day-to-day, so like how you do that work, who with, what kinds of tools, where you're working, and all of those kinds of things. Yeah, no,
I saw you sent me that question before, and I thought, I don't know really how to answer that, but because my life, as it has been for most of the last 2 years, is basically here, either sat down at my desk or stood up as I am now. So in terms of the kind of how I do the research that I do, so in terms of the methods I use and what have you, I've used mixed methods, but I'm particularly, what I really enjoy is talking to people, doing qualitative research, and I think sometimes we could not overlook exactly, but we forget how valuable it is, just the kind of quite standard research method of one-to-one conversations with people to get really rich understanding of their what they think about things, what their desires are, what they want. So I've been a little bit conservative probably in how I approach research often, but I've been trying to expand that repertoire, and I think I've been inspired by the kinds of things that people like Julia do, and people in the architecture school do, in terms of more innovative ways of trying to engage with groups and participate in stuff. So I'm kind of working on different ways of thinking about participatory methods too. Who do I work with? So I guess there's the one hand is the kind of, we receive funding to do research, and they come from different places. So often it's with government departments, it might be from a research council. So I mentioned I've been doing work for a Swedish research council. And then it's also about who the people that I speak to through the research, and whose voices we try and bring out through the research. And for me, it's about the whole range of different types of stakeholders we have in a place, in a region. So citizens, and people who are, if you like, normal people are the most important, probably, in terms of getting those voices heard from a range of different places and backgrounds, but also engaging with policymakers, making sure that we can get those voices to policymakers, and speaking to policymakers and to businesses and to people who are in a position of power, because we have to be able to get those messages across to the people in power and hear their perspectives too, to understand make the decisions. So for me, it's this whole range of people. It tends to be most of my work is about cities, and it's about local or regional action. So that's kind of the sphere that I tend to work in. I don't know if that answers your question or not. So please just ask more if you want. But yeah,
that's great. And we can open up in a bit. Just maybe move on to the third question I have in my head, which is, what would you consider to be the most important issue for Sheffield right now? And we realise this is a really big and open question. So the idea is just kind of bringing lots of different voices and perspectives rather than necessarily being comprehensive in that answer.
No, sure. Yeah, no, that's fine. And so I guess, I thought about this and I thought, you probably just want to hear a bit about what I'm interested, what I know a bit about. So I'll try and think about that. But there is an obvious one that there's a kind of very obvious thing that we want to get the politicians and leaders to start to really ramp up the action that their rhetoric suggests they need to do, and we all have a kind of role to try and ensure that can happen. So it's an obvious one, but I think we always have to keep restating it, don't we? Otherwise, we kind of can get a bit lost. So there's a key thing there about us all mobilizing and engaging with as many different types of people that we can to kind of help to promote those messages. I don't know how good I am at doing that, but I'm good at saying that we should do that. So I guess that's something. In terms of actions, obviously, we have to decarbonise absolutely everything we do. If I think about the built environment, there's very practical actions around retrofit. Is just the very obvious thing that we ought to be spending all our money on, and we're not as a country, and there's so little happening on that. So for Sheffield, that should be the key thing about our existing building stock and housing stock. That should be our first priority. But a big challenge there is about, and this is what I've kind of been looking at in some detail recently, is about the skills needed to do so and the jobs needed to do so. So not necessarily the technology mostly exists, and the money side could be solved if we chose to, but we don't necessarily have the jobs and the skills sets to do so. And I guess so you people in the room there are kind of critical to the future of our built environment and having the right skill, and people like Julia and Kathleen are critical to that, in terms of kind of supporting development of those skill sets. But I've been looking at kind of some of the more, prosaic things that need to happen. So the idea that we need 600,000 heat pumps a year to be going into homes over the next few years, up from 30,000 a year up till recently. So 20 times as many need to be going in. But there isn't the workforce to do that. So how do we make people want to do that? How do we make it an attractive thing to do? How do we find people the skills to do it? And so that's kind of a real challenge for me. Of what I've been looking at the moment is the kind of skills landscape, and also the sort of small business kind of trades that need to do that. I think to join them up and to be able to support them to lead the sort of decarbonisation challenge for me. And then if I think about my kind of underlying focus, which is about justice and economic justice, it's about all those people who are doing things that we won't need anymore, and all those people in places where are already disadvantaged in some way. So all those, if we stick with the heat pump kind of thing, what about all those people who are currently doing gas boilers and putting gas boilers in? How do we support them to reskill or retrain to do something else? So that's quite a simple example, I realise, but it's kind of an easy one. But there's examples of that all the way across the economy. And also, it's not just about those frontline jobs, but the wider range of activities that go on behind the scenes. And it's about the communities where all these things happen. And one thing I think we have to always, sorry, I'm kind of rambling on, I hope it's all right, but one thing we have to remember as well is when we're thinking about how do we decarbonise Sheffield, or how do we take climate action in Sheffield, what the impacts of what we do are beyond Sheffield. So if we think about, and I'm thinking about the technologies again that we need to use, but there's lots of other examples. Where are they made? What are the kind of conditions of work for the people who made them? So we've heard in recent years, we've had lots of examples of modern slavery and forced labour within renewable energy supply chains. So, and I guess the point there is just because it's about greening our energy systems or greening our built environment, we're still living in the same economic system. So how can we also think about the wider economic system that we're situating it in, and those questions about, for example, forced labour or environmental degradation as we take apart half of South America to get all the lithium that we need for our electric vehicles, batteries, and what have you. So yeah, so it might then mean that we need to rethink about how we think about work, how we value consumption, think about our consumption. So it suddenly becomes some very big questions, and I'll perhaps stop there. But I hope that's.
Thank you. Yeah, that was brilliant. Thanks.
Thank you.
That's nice. Have you guys got any questions or thoughts?
I get that it's the end of a long day, so I won't be offended if you don't.
You don't have research around any research around kind of dealing with like mistrust of new technologies, or like how people can maybe resist them and like overcome that?
Just check that I heard right, because it was a bit vague. Did you say about
forward actually, because it's nice for him to see you as well.
Okay.
Yeah, take the. That would be great. Okay, you'd have to sit in the chair, but if you could, if you could come so they can see you, I think that would be great.
I like the idea of there being a question chair.
Rather than just a voice from somewhere.
More questions now. The chair has been introduced. Have you done any research around dealing with like mistrust of new technologies, or like resistance to them being put in, and like why that might be, and like overcoming it?
Yeah, no, that's really important. That's a really important question, really. I haven't done lots of direct work on that. I'll give a small example, and I'm going to talk about heat pumps. It's going to get a bit boring, isn't it? But when I've been talking to installers over the last few months, one of the things that they come back to is that people don't know how it works and don't necessarily trust that it's going to be the same, because it does work in a different way to how your normal gas central heating would work, and there are different things to overcome. But also for them, there's this. This is what installers are saying. There's lots of installers out there who aren't doing it properly, and so that's creating reputational problems for the industry. Now, these are installers who, they'll say that they're the only person who could do it properly, obviously. But I think there's some truth in that there are reputational problems for some of these technologies, and particularly when you talk about people's households where there's the disruption involved and all the rest, and kind of unsure. Yeah, you're unsure. You want a warm house at the end of the day, and if there's worries about how that or the cost of that might be, then yeah. So sorry, that's not directly answered your question, but that's an example from some of the stuff that I have done. That's a really good question there.
Okay, you don't need to do chat, but do come within the camera. You're right, good point. But,
would you mind telling us how heat pumps work? So I don't personally know.
Was that how do heat pumps work?
Yeah.
I'm definitely not the person to ask about that. If it's basically the way a fridge works in reverse, then that's as far as you're going to get from me. I'm not the technical person, I'm afraid.
Well, if it's a ground source heat pump, it has to go in the ground and then it comes back, but it's the infrastructure behind it is really expensive. There are also air source heat pumps, but like Will was saying, from my experience, I'm currently working on a net zero carbon housing scheme in Cambridge, and one of the technologies contemplated by the client was air source pumps, but after conversations with installers, it does seem that the market is somewhat premature and is not yet really well developed. So, and there are many problems that are being highlighted in previous developments with them. They're also it's a big system and they're noisy as well. So they take a lot of space and yeah, they cause a nuisance for the residents. So the system doesn't seem to be quite out there yet.
Thanks, Kat. I mean, I think there's a ground source heat pump at Sharrow School actually, and the kind of playing fields in the schools. And I guess that kind of scale of projects, and if something's new build, it becomes a bit of an easier thing.
Yeah.
To adopt. But, sorry, any other questions or? Sorry. Okay, no, don't worry, no pressure. I mean, I think it's been really rich and interesting. So thank you so much for joining us. And I guess if there are other things that come afterwards, I could tweet you or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, send me an email, whatever. That's great. It's been a real pleasure to see you all and say hello. So thanks for inviting me along.
Yeah, pleasure. And yeah, great. Cheers. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks a lot.
you.
See you again. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.